Hello and welcome to the birth of a new dimension. So this new dimension has been birthed very recently, within the past couple of weeks or months. It's something that we have all been laboring to achieve for a very, very long time. We could say it's been going on for years, but it's really been going on for thousands of years. And it's not just an individual journey. This also relates to the planetary struggle for freedom. So our planet is an actual living, alive being. If you already know about that, I don't mean to be stating the obvious, but yeah, it's not just a dead rock that we are sitting upon and utilizing resources from. So just like your own body contains your own consciousness, and there might be tiny yeasts or fungi that live, in conjunction with your body and that draw upon your epithelial cells and other resources to stay alive, so too does Earth have a consciousness that resides within the physical presence of her material body and has an agenda and a sense of self and a sense of, a trajectory through time. And all of our individual awakenings are part of that planetary awakening. Again, this seems really obvious. I'm just stating it for everyone so we're all on the same page. So I wanted to speak a little bit about mind control and the idea that right now, due to technology and other outside influences, humans on Earth are not able to effectively use their own minds. And that's a very startling thing, because you're supposed to be able to use your own mind just like you're supposed to be able to move your own arms and legs. And how crazy would it be if someone else was actually sending neurological signals to your arms and legs and making you do some kind of a wacky dance against your own will? Well, guess what? That's what's been going on with the human mind for a very, very long time. And I call it a hacked operating system. Not to say that humans are equatable with mere computers, because you're much more than mere computers, but this is the idea that the human mind was not invented or created by humans, did not naturally develop in some, biological, evolutionary, linear path. It didn't develop like that. It's literally like a computer's operating system that was written by beings that do not like humans, that do not care about humans, that do not care about this planet, that do not care about any planet. It was written by beings that are incredibly self-serving and self-centered, and that they perform activities that would be considered to be completely antithetical to cosmic law. And cosmic law is not upheld by some, magistrate's court with powdered wigs and people wearing long robes and, banging their gavels. It's not that type of a court. It's more like the laws of physics, where it's like, something, everybody who's on Earth is obeying the law of gravity, all of the molecules and all of the living beings. It's like, it's irrefutable. So there are these natural laws, I spoke about that a little bit last week, that are irrefutable. And the only way that these aberrations, or things that are not supposed to exist, have been able to exist on Earth and in the society for so long, is that there's been a field that is created that is like, let's call it deferring, like kicking the can down the road. So here's what I spoke about last week, beings that twist and distort cosmic law, where they say, oh yes, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, but then they forget the other rejoinder, which is harming none, or the other thing, which is what you send out comes back to you. And then the other rejoinder that they like to leave off is instantaneously and amplified. So yeah, if you only take the first section of the statement about what cosmic law is, then it's like, what you send out comes back to you in 3 or 4 or 13 billion years, So people have been erroneously applying that to what's happening on the surface of Earth. And it's, in a lot of ways, it has allowed them to have the illusion of being free from the repercussions of their actions. But this is merely an illusion, because we're no longer in a cellular dead zone. For a long time, we were, like, in terms of flying through the time field, moving through an area of the time field wherein there was very little connection and communication with the source of consciousness, or the source of higher intelligence, or that organizing principle that is like the great composer that created all of this music. And that we're in that dead zone because our genetic antennae, which are both receivers and transmitters, were warped and distorted. So that's the very first thing. And this is all about how you invade a planet. If you want to invade a planet, the first thing you do is snip the wires. You're going to cut that planet off from outside communication, so that whatever other beings that might be able to assist don't know that assistance is needed. That's the whole point. So God is not dead. Angels are not indifferent. Benevolent extraterrestrials aren't wankers sitting on interdimensional clouds just watching your suffering. No. We've been in a cellular dead zone with the messages of our deep distress calls not effectively reaching the people that actually need to know about them. So, don't be disheartened by the fact that this has been going on. That's the first thing that you're going to do. You're going to invade a planet. You're going to cut that planet off from being able to effectively cry out for help. And then, the next thing is mind control. And this has been going on since what is known as the fall. In the Bible, it's the fall from grace, but I'm not a biblical literalist, and I think there's so much unhealthy stuff in the Bible in terms of a blame the victim mentality. That is what these planetary rapists did. They first raped this planet, they cut off the wires so there's no SOS. And then the victims, like the planetary consciousness and all of the organisms that live here, were told, oh yeah, this happened to you because you did something wrong. You deserve this in some way, and it is right for you to be experiencing this. And with the mind wipe or the amnesia that came from the experience of the fall of consciousness, it became possible to do this. So the mind wipe happened because, okay, I should start from the beginning here. So yeah, we used to have a very sophisticated worldwide culture on the surface of Earth that is known as Atlantis. It wasn't just on one particular continent, and the people that lived in Atlantis they might have been humanoid in appearance. However, their behaviors and the way that they metabolized was very different than our present human state. So everyone was telepathic. That means we didn't have to move our lips. Back then, I would not have had to use my flapping, moving mouth parts to make these crazy, funky sounds, and would not have had to record them laboriously with my wonderful microphone here and send them out, in like a digital format in order for you to hear me. No. What we would do instead is broadcast our minds directly to one another because, as I said just immediately previous to this, your DNA is an antenna that is both a transmitter and a receiver. So yeah, this is part, and it's not just your DNA, because that's a very just flat scientific way of saying it. Your entire body, your entire being, you are connected to this ocean of consciousness, and you both receive signals and send signals to the ocean of consciousness. Again, humanity has been unfairly, unduly quarantined, cut off from that ocean of consciousness, so that humanity has not been able to effectively share what's been going on. But when all is well, when the energy is flowing the way it's supposed to, that's what we're supposed to be experiencing. So not only did we used to be telepathic in terms of being able to share information directly to one another, and when you're telepathic, you don't have to use language. And literally, this is a huge caution, because there's all these people that think they're receiving messages from interdimensional ascended masters and fancy folk from upstairs and all sorts of things like that. And I'm telling you, if they're speaking to you in English words, like, they ain't worth talking to, because real divinity does not use the English language to communicate, and it communicates directly into your eye of insight, your inner eye, what's in the center of your forehead and what's connected through your crown, top of your head to higher dimensional, less dense realms. That's where real intelligence resides. It does not reside at the level of consciousness that we would call the daily human waking intellect. And that most people focus their attention only on verbalized thought and the daily waking intellect, completely ignoring what is the real birthright and the real system of perception, the higher faculties that are, like the insight, the eye of insight. So that eye, it perceives in information packets that are not interpreted as words. Like, that's it. It's moving at a much, much faster rate than words. So the portion of your mind, like if you're reading a book and the portion of your mind that actually says, in your head, you hear a little voice that says, once upon a time, like as your eyes scan the page, you read the words once upon a time, and you hear that little voice in your head. That voice is moving several times slower than your true mind. And if you you can upgrade your reading skills. If you don't have to use that inner voice, then you can absorb information much more quickly and effectively as you're reading it. But reading has, as like a fundamental foundation level, cognitive dissonance. There's a basic problem with having to ingest the symbolic word structure through your eyes and interpret it through your system of interpretation and come away with the sense of meaning. So, auditory symbolic sound structure is inherently flawed, and written sound structure. Translated written sound structure is also doubly flawed. So we have all of these different ways of communicating here that are not effective, and that's because humanity has lost telepathy, which is a way to directly transmit your pure insight, your pure inner vision into somebody else's mind. So I spend a lot of my day painting extensive paintings that are what I see with my inner vision. And if I had the capacity to live in a telepathic society, like I'm totally telepathic, I've been beaming it out for a long time, but I had to recognize that not a lot of people are picking up my signals. So yeah, okay, if you're new to who I am and new to my broadcasts, hi, I'm an intergalactic walk-in. So I'm a star person. I'm a literal piece of consciousness from the stellar network that is in this physical human container. So just as a brief anecdote, early in my tenure here as Aurora, like I came in 2001, and like 2005, 2006, 2007, I worked as a custom framer in some relatively small like art supply stores and custom framing shops. And the work was very boring, but I did have the opportunity to improve my math skills by doing that work, and that was very important, and that was part of like the rehabilitative process for my neurology, which had been damaged as part of the death of the previous occupant of this body. So although it was a very boring job, there were some worthwhile side effects of it in terms of me being able to practice and improve my math skills. And I also did a lot in what I would call human outreach, because up until that point, I hadn't interacted with a lot of people, and I had, perceived the world through the window of television and, reading and hearing things on the radio, and I'd certainly interacted with people, but I didn't really know about what people's mentalities were like, or what the limits or, expansiveness of their mentality was like. So by being a custom framer, what I would do when people would come and they would say, okay, like here's my watercolor painting, I want to get this framed. I would say with my mouth, okay, great, let's frame it. What do you have in mind? And I would beam like some suggestions into their mind, like, do you want it to have something that looks like this or something that looks like this? And I had to start understanding when I did that people were not receiving those secondary supplemental telepathic projections, that they were just hearing my words. So then I learned I had to start doing it with physical samples. I had to say, oh, what do you have in mind? And I would take down samples off of the wall and say, do you want something that looks like this or something that looks like this? Like they had to see the physical samples. And then with some customers, what I started to find was that I could take them on a little bit of a mental journey, and we could start using a little bit of, shorthand with our mouths, not having to say every single thing that we're thinking, and to be able to achieve the desired aesthetic. Like, you're kind of figuring out, but it's like a consensual partnership where you're trying to ask someone else, what's in your mind? Communicate what you want to me. And so, I can reach into other people's minds and I can sense, like, is it this? And, what I would do is have to verbalize all this. So I hope that I'm describing this effectively. What I learned basically was that in this human realm, there are some people that were able to pick up my mental telepathic broadcasts and communicate on that higher level and use a verbal shorthand. And there were some people that were like dead spark plugs. There was like no spark. They couldn't hear or sense or see or feel what I was saying telepathically with just my mind. And I mean, that might be normal. You might think that that's like, you understand. You might understand that is normal. I had to learn that from experience, because I'm not used to coming from a very different place where being telepathic is the baseline. It's like having sight. Here we come from a sighted world where most people have two eyes and most people can see with depth perception. And so to not have that sense is like a person that is unusual. But I had to recognize that I'm in this world where very, very few people have this higher perception of being able to be telepathic. And then I had to change my way of sharing my messages, because again, I have all this information that comes to me through direct insight. It's like using my attention or my inner telescope to look directly at the cosmos and learn about different structures of reality. And then what I've been doing since the very first day that I came here, into this body as Aurora in 2001, I've been drawing these extensive diagrams. And I would draw, when I first got here, like in the first couple of years, I would make these drawings, I would draw in a notebook, and I would find find people and try to share it with them and just show them the pictures. And they would just kind of smile and nod politely. And I kind of started to understand at that point, like, okay, they're just seeing lines on the page. They're not understanding the other supplemental information, like the telepathic footnotes of what those line drawings actually mean. So then I started to realize, like, okay, I'm going to have to figure out some way to verbally articulate what these drawings are and what these thoughts are. And that actually has been my journey for, whatever. I've been here, oh my goodness, for about 17 years at this point. So the first couple of years of my journey were all about, rehabilitating my capacity to understand and do math, and also to effectively use words to articulate. And I was not articulate when I first came here about either basic daily mundane tasks or about the higher dimensional insights that I was having. So it's been a real challenge. So being on the radio, I'm certainly not complaining. I appreciate my radio show very much. Being on the radio is a challenge because I'm way more comfortable being able to speak with pictures. And usually I'll, draw with a pencil on paper, or digitally I'll use a whiteboard, or gesture with my hands, or use little models, or, I'm an artist and I make paintings. And the reason why I make paintings is like, I am trying to communicate what I see internally. And it's not just a pretty picture, although they are pretty pictures. And you can check them all out at flyingrainbowlasagne.com. You can see detailed images of what I'm talking about. Nothing wrong with painting pretty pictures, but these are actually highly detailed maps, and they're calibrated. And they're intended not only to convey information, but also to calibrate you, that when you stand in front of these pieces of artwork, that the structures that you're looking at speak to you on a cellular level, and you change the structures that are inside of you. So again, they have a meaning and a purpose beyond mere decoration and even beyond mere communication. But it took a long time for me to figure out how I would ever put these things into words. It took many years of me. When people used to come to my studio, I would just kind of dump a lot of lasagna on their plate, talk about all these different things in a very haphazard way. And it was only through, trial and error of trying to find a way to articulate these things and do it in a sense that made sense, because usually my brain is not very linear. I had to figure out, okay, people aren't getting it, so I have to start from the beginning, and I have to do 1, 2, 3, and then build upon 1, 2, 3 with 4, 5, 6, and then make things make sense. So what I ended up doing in order to practice articulation, this is another little anecdote. So way back when I lived in Woodstock, this is 2005, 2006, I had a community access TV show. They had a really nice little TV station that was set up there, and it's public access, which means that you don't have to pay money in order to have your own show. Sorry about that. That was my furry overlord seeing something out the window. So yeah, public access, you don't have to pay, and that's a good thing, because most of the people that I knew that had TV shows on that little station were not millionaires, and I certainly was not a millionaire. I was able to have one in the middle of the night, literally, and I would drive out there, and I would be, the only person in this little tiny station, and I would hold up the lasagna shape and try to talk about what it was all about and bring examples of my artwork, and gave me a little bit of latitude. I thought, no one's looking at this show in the middle of the night. But then sometimes the next day someone would say, hey, I saw what you were talking about on TV, and that was pretty interesting. So it was encouraging. And through doing that, I kind of stumbled my way through. I kind of found a way to find words, choose the right words, put them together, make some kind of sense of what I'm talking about. And then after doing that for many years, I ended up realizing that I needed to record lessons, but it couldn't, I don't feel very comfortable with writing. So this is, again, when I'm talking about the cognitive dissonance of words. So just the way my brain is structured, I feel a lot more comfortable speaking extemporaneously, with an oral presentation. And, when I sit down at a computer keyboard to type, a lot of the time my brain freezes. And it's how do I get the words to actually come out through my fingertips? And I learned later on, as I learned more about the brain, that it's a totally different neural pathway to try to write than it is to try to speak. And typing is different than writing longhand or drawing or sketching or something like that. So it was very challenging for me to be able to write things out. And that's why I haven't really written this in the form of an actual textbook. But what I ended up finding was a very good app on the computer. And also, I should tell you about technology too. So I used to just not have access to technology because it was all very expensive. Computers are expensive. expensive, and tablets and things like that are expensive. And so eventually, I was presenting my work at math art conferences, and this was very exciting to me and was like a real stretch because I had never considered myself to be a mathematician or to be able to circulate in those levels. I was, a bit unsure at the time of my math skills. And meeting the other mathematicians, they mostly were very cool. Like, a few people condescended to me, but mostly people were very cool, and they were just interested in my ideas. And I started to find out what computer science was able to do in terms of 3D printing and animations and other forms of rendering. And then as soon as I came home from the conference, I was like, okay, I'm going to have to get a computer. I'm going to have to do some kind of a fundraiser or something, like save my money so that I can get a computer so that I can do these things, because I'm like, hey, no offense, if a bunch of nerds, like if a bunch of bespectacled nerds can do this cool stuff with their computer programs, imagine what a creative, based artist can do with these programs. So that was when I started to find out that technology can be something really cool and can give me like more latitude and more expansion in being able to express myself. So I ended up getting an iPad tablet, and there was an app on there that was like for recording whiteboards. It's very good. I can still tell you about it. It's called Educreations, and they had a free, section, and then they had a professional section, and you can record your voice and draw pictures and draw diagrams at the same time. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is that was the critical integument that I needed in order to really be able to express these ideas. So I needed to go through this whole trajectory of, how do I say this to the people of this time and place, and, kind of struggling and stumbling through it until I found the right medium through which I could communicate. And that was when I started to record these formal lessons that I now call Lessons for Full Spectrum Humans. So this brief plug, I'm not an advertiser or anything like that, but I do appreciate when people support my work by formally enrolling. So this is my online class, and I've been running it for about 5 years at this point, which is quite, oh my goodness, what a lot of stamina it has taken. And the reason why I started doing the recorded class, at first I just did some very informal 10-minute little presentations and videos that I would put up on YouTube. And then I started to understand that it's not effective. It's not like a fair presumption or whatever. It's not a good approach to be like, okay, we're going to teach you higher dimensional physics in 10 minutes. It's like, that is a huge, that's a high bar to jump over. That's a really big challenge. And I realized that because it's necessary to build a foundation, it's necessary to say, here are the foundation concepts, and then have people digest those concepts and master them, and then build upon them. Just like if you're playing an instrument and you're learning to play the piano, first you learn Mary Had a Little Lamb, then you learn something a little bit harder, then you learn something a little bit harder, and then you eventually become a virtuoso. And it doesn't happen in 10 minutes. So I started to figure out, okay, I'm going to have to find some way to formalize these thoughts and ideas and to put them together in a linear presentation that people can build upon the foundation of knowledge. And then, I can communicate effectively, and they won't be frustrated at not being able to understand what I'm saying. So that's when I started to record it as actual formal lessons, and that was in 2013, and that was right after we went through that experience of at the end of December 2012 with the sense of having a watershed moment and everything changing. So after that moment, I was like, well, something, there's no use waiting around. There's no time like the present. It's now time to share this information. And information is very powerful. Wait, brief pause. Information is very powerful because it can control a person's flight through time. And this also goes back to why mind control is so powerful, because mind control, it perforce controls a person's flight through time. Your mind is what determines which timeline you are experiencing, or which timeline you are co-creating as a divine miniature co-creator with this great, conductor and great composer up there. So your thoughts, these are not just random things, or they're not meant to be just random things, and they are not inconsequential. That your thoughts actually are creating your reality and determining which timelines you're experiencing. And let's say if we understand how profound that is, then anything that affects your thoughts has an impact on your trajectory through time, and that means it can either make you go towards eternal life or towards the membrane of death. And the membrane of death, this is a very, I use graphics, designs, diagrams in order to show people what I'm talking about. We literally are in this time vortex each individual has a life that is, in this vortex shape, and we're in a refinery of consciousness, and we're supposed to be moving the way that a lens focuses light into a specific beam of light. We're supposed to be moving from these general peripheral areas of our consciousness into a much more focused central core level of our consciousness, that is ourselves as a divine being. And this is all hijacking. This has all been hijacked. So there is a wonderful, beautiful creator of this world, of this realm, that is benevolent and loves us and isn't trying to just give us a big giant, pile of shit to climb over every day. Pardon my French. The challenge is that a lot of those natural laws have been distorted and diverted. So here's one example that I can give to you. If you envision the vortex shape and the edges of the vortex, that's that membrane of death. Well, right in front of the membrane of death, the original programmer, the original composer of this music in this realm, put things there that are deterrents, like fears, so that you will turn away and not go towards the membrane of death and instead go towards eternal life. It's like if there's a flood on the highway or the road goes over a cliff and they put out those yellow caution cones or flags, and it's like red, orange, X, don't go here. You're not supposed to go in this direction. That was the original intention for fear. Fear was intended to be something that guided one's consciousness away from death. And instead, fear has been distorted and has also, let's say, been reprogrammed or reprogrammed itself. If you can imagine a computer program that's I'm going to exceed my pre-programmed parameters and do something else instead, because all of a sudden these fears decide I'm not just going to block the edge of a highway that goes off a cliff. I'm going to stand in front of your path to eternal life too. And that's not right. So there's a lot of things in the way that this school of the cosmos has been distorted so that now it's not possible to learn effectively in school. And again, none of that is by accident. All of those subversions of both your original system of perception and the structure of cosmic law and the application of cosmic law has all been intentional by those planetary rapists so that you can be exploited. So, and I'm sorry, this is depressing. I don't mean to be giving you all of this, negative information. However, it's important to know about it so that we can be free of it. And I'll never tell you about all of the horrible things that are going on without giving you the solution, the key, how to get out of the cage. Let's not just endlessly examine the bars on the cage. The solution is the flying rainbow lasagna shape. That is literally how you can transform yourself on a genetic level, reclaim your higher faculties for perception, and literally become a computer programmer that reprograms the hacked system that we've been experiencing for so long. You get to reprogram your mind. So the mind is a hacked operating system that everybody installs in infancy and early childhood, or almost everybody that's here, because it's necessary. It's like if you want to access any of the other apps or programs that are available here, you need to download this operating system. And the operating system is inherently flawed, and it is flawed by the beings that originally came to this planet and invaded. That's the bad news. The bad news, the good news is the planet was invaded 10 or 20,000 years ago, a long time ago. That's what caused the fall of Atlantis. So circling back to Atlantis, we used to be telepathic. We used to be light eaters, and this also is part of the functions of the higher faculties, that when you're functioning correctly, when your anatomy is functioning correctly, you don't need to eat physical food. That doesn't mean that you eat nothing, because I understand a lot of people in this time and place, they think, that would be so convenient. It's like going from, needing something to needing nothing. But it's not true. It's not that you don't need anything. You need light. And, if we lived in this present society and you are a light eater and you live in the northern hemisphere and it's cold and dark in the winter, you would starve and die. That's what plants do. They starve and die. So either you'd have to be nomadic and move to someplace warm when the light goes away in the wintertime, or you'd have to live someplace where there's a constant, steady supply of light for you to be able to eat. And if there's clouds on the day when you're hungry, then you would have to find some way to supersede those clouds, get up above the clouds. So these are all of the caveats of becoming a light eater. And I also tell people that in this time and place, we have giant refrigerators. You wouldn't think of renting an apartment that doesn't have a refrigerator. You'd be like, where am I going to put my food? In Atlantis and in like more sophisticated cultures, what was done was storing of energy in giant crystals. So you can imagine like a giant quartz crystal, the dimensions of a refrigerator sitting in the middle of the house, like in a central location. And that stores, you could call it energy or solar energy or consciousness or awareness. It stores food so that you can have it even if the sun isn't shining on that day. And also our environment fed us in the same way that a Zen garden, like people who are Zen practitioners, create a space that promotes feelings of calmness and meditation and harmonious thoughts or harmonious states of mind that do not involve thought. That is what our entire world was structured like before what is known as the fall of consciousness and the fall of Atlantis. So that means that the entire world, every place, was a beautiful manicured garden or wild-crafted garden. Every structure that we had was meant to preserve life force energy and reflect it back to the people around you. So this is not like saying that you lived on nothing. You lived on something. You lived on the emanations from the sun and the stars and the emanations from your environment that held and cultivated and amplified those emanations. That's not nothing. And now with that under your belt, you can also understand why it's not that easy to, I'm just going to snap my fingers and turn into a light eater. Because, oh boy, when I first came here, I'm like, okay, just trying to eat nothing but pure light and not understanding why that wasn't enough to actually nourish my body. So now what I do is I do sun gazing and I eat tons of physical food too. And someone jokingly described me recently. They're like, oh, so you're like a hybrid car. Like some of these hybrid electric cars, they can run a certain amount of miles on their electrical stores. And then they also have a gas tank that they can go more if they run out of electricity and if you can't find a charging station. And that's exactly what my body is like, that I run on solar power and that I get a lot of my vitality, my cellular vitality, my ideas and my creativity and my, exuberance from the sun and the stars. And that also get a lot of my physical energy and exuberance and joy from eating like bacon and eggs or, whatever, tacos. I love tortillas. I get these good grain-free tortillas because I don't eat the GMO foods, and it's just very, very difficult to find foods that have not been genetically modified. And all of that is part of this consciousness reduction agenda that is here. And that is what mind control is. So the mind control is literally saying, you don't get to move your arms and legs. Something else is going to move your arms and legs for you. That something else is not a benevolent something else. It is a usurper, a being that is here to exploit you and use you and eventually make you crash into the membrane of death and then be reinserted and try it again and have this endlessly circular looping experience until you finally, like I say, get out through the wormhole. And the way that you do that is flying rainbow lasagna. And now let me also say this. Wait, let me just pause. I invented or created the flying rainbow lasagna in 2001 as part of the experience of coming into this body, as a abstraction, a stellar presence, being able to come into the physical body. Prior to that, there have been many people who have found the way out, the wormhole out of this particular level of reality. So back in Atlantis, everybody ascended, and ascension means you find the wormhole. You find the little tiny crack through which your consciousness can leave this level of reality. And this level of reality was never meant to be a prison. It was always meant to be like a womb, like a mother's womb, where we are living and developing, and then at a certain point when all is right, you get born. So yeah, how very uncomfortable and inappropriate the idea that anybody should be stuck in the womb. The womb is matter, the material world, from the root word mother, that we are consciousness in matter, and we're here for a reason, and the reason is not punishment or suffering. We're here to learn. And this is, again, supposed to be a perfectly mirrored, reflective world where what you send out comes back to you. But instead, what we're experiencing is a twisted and distorted fun house that's not very fun, but has distorted mirrors in it. So instead of a perfect hall of mirrors, what you've got is maybe you might send out the best, most well-intentioned broadcasts of your mind and of your heart, but if they might be sent back to you either diminished or delayed or not at all. And none of that is part of the structure of the cosmos. What's supposed to happen is what you send out comes back to you instantaneously and amplified. So flying rainbow lasagna is the solution to how you can transcend the necessity of having to explore every single possible little, square centimeter of this level of reality before you finally find that one little wormhole, that tiny little crack that allows you to get out. That has been the way it's been up until this point, that there are indeed ascended masters or beings who graduated. They're like grad students. They went to school and they learned and then they graduated. And what you learn when you're in this school is that it is a very effed up school, that it's not actually a place where rules are applied consistently. That's a huge presumption. And there's also a huge presumption in the idea that everything that is here is supposed to be here. That is erroneous. No, everything that is here right now is not actually supposed to be here. We've got a lot of pathogens, a lot of levels of consciousness or aspects of characteristics that are not divine. And what we're supposed to be experiencing here is a refinery of consciousness where only the correct levels of consciousness exit through the wormhole. So I've used the analogy in the past that that's like word processing, an old-fashioned, word processor, not writing a term paper on a typewriter, but as soon as word processors were invented, it's like you can save different versions of an expression. And the first time you write, you just get everything out on the paper and you leave the spelling mistakes, and it doesn't matter if it's not perfect, and then you press save. And then you go back and you fix your spelling mistakes, and then you save it again. And then you go back and you reread it and you refine it and you take out things and put in new things and you save it again. And that's exactly what this process of flying through time can be like. And then the idea is eventually you've said everything you want to say in your wonderful term paper of your life, and you have taken out all the spelling and grammatical mistakes, and then you're ready to hand in your work to your professor, and that's what that graduation is like. And this is all self-work. It's not necessarily like saying you have to do something on earth, like I have to dig 20,000 ditches, or, I have to feed 20,000 kitty cats. It's not some kind of a random, arbitrary external goal. It's all a goal of internal development, of how you as a person can refine your consciousness to be able to know what are your true personality characteristics, who is the true you. What are you really? Who are you really? And so that's what this school is really meant to be. It is a school where we learn who we really are. And, it's very, very difficult because it has not been possible to fully explore and fully express who one really is if you're not in control of your own mind. And that's the danger of this downloaded, hacked human operating system. So yes, meditation and mindfulness are a couple of techniques to be able to begin to deinstall, or let's say defragment, like if your computer's running slow and you do defragment, and then it's like kicking out all the bugs, getting rid of all this, debugging. That's what we should call this, debugging the system. And that we are all like computer scientists that are now presently debugging our own consciousness system, our own DNA. As your DNA is an antenna, it's a transceiver. It's also a transmitter of information. It's way more accurate also than the written word. It's more akin to the blockchain, this idea that's new in computer technology of a record of all transactions that have ever occurred. And that's what DNA is. It's a record of all of the consciousness transactions that have ever occurred. This organism plus this organism interacted with this end result. And then this end result interacted with this new organism and created this end result. All of that is literally written in the record of your DNA. So your DNA is a end result of many, it's a song that's the end result of many notes played over many generations. That's what I'm trying to say with my mouth here. And you can think of it like each generation is playing a note, and they all add up to a one long sustained chord that is, life. That is the symphony of life. But also I'd like to say, you as a musician in your present generation, this is the miracle of what's happening right now on our planet, and why I say welcome to the birth of a new dimension. We no longer have to behave the way that we have behaved up until this point. So we don't have to circulate endlessly and explore every single possible way that is not the way out before we finally find the way out. That was never our intended pathway. What was intended was for us to have higher vision, insight, so that we can see what is the pathway out of here. If you're driving down the road and you can actually see It's actually easy. You're like, oh, I'm just going to stay right here in my lane, driving down the road, as opposed to endlessly hitting the guardrails and then driving over a cliff. That's very, very hard. And that's what everyone has been doing by hitting the membrane of death and being reinserted over and over. So it's not just a question of how can you fly through time? How can you stay in the middle of the road? How do you see? It's also a question of something else trying to control your eye. That's the mind control. So through this hacked operating system, hackers are able to reach into your mind and say things to you that have an impact on where you drive your car. And the things that they say to you are not necessarily accurate. They're not a very good GPS system. They're actually quite horrible. They'll be like, turn left here. And it's like, you drive off a cliff. And so you can't listen to them, but it's very challenging because they are literal mind rapists and they force themselves into the mind as intrusive thoughts. That this is what we are fighting against. So meditation, I mean, it's interesting when I listen to some of my videos that I recorded a long time ago about meditation, and I look at where my mind was then to where my mind is now, like it does become a lot easier. I have many fewer intrusive thoughts than I ever used to have. My mind muscles are a lot stronger. But what it used to feel like to me was like having a spastic limb where you want to be walking in a certain way down a certain path, but something else makes your feet trip or something else holds your feet back and you can't move in the way that you really want to move. So yeah, there was a lot of inner detritus for a very long time. So one of the things you can do with meditation, you can just sit quietly in a comfortable position and just observe your mind. And that gives you a little bit of breathing space. But once you get a little bit of breathing space, you don't just have to sit there and be like, oh, look at all this crap. Like you can actually clean up the crap. And that's Flying Rainbow Lasagna. You literally can do this inner genetic dance that transforms what you are tuning into with your antenna of your DNA. By changing the dance, because your DNA is always dancing, it's vibrating like a string. And when you have new thoughts and new ideas and are given new approaches, that's what Flying Rainbow Lasagna is, your DNA begins to behave in a new way. So yeah, DNA has behavior. It's not just a flat static object. It actually does stuff. And, science and humans at this moment aren't really recognizing that as much because they think like, oh, you can take somebody's DNA and you can hijack it and you can put it into a new egg and, add a little sperm and then come up with a new person that's like, has the characteristics of the person that you took the original DNA sample from. But that is totally simplistic because it's not recognizing that sample was taken as a snapshot at that moment of the genetic dance, and that the next day the genes will be behaving differently. This is all about genetic behavior, why certain genes are expressed, why certain genes, science calls it being turned on or being turned off, why some genes are expressed and some genes are suppressed or inhibited, why certain capacities become realized and certain capacities just are expressed as a potential. And then this has everything to do with consciousness. So it's also, there's potential in your life. It doesn't have to be realized, but it can be if you want it to, and you can write a new story. That's what Flying Rainbow Lasagna is. So in order to jump from a far distant timeline to a timeline that is one of the more central, desirable timelines, there is the challenge of discontinuity. So let's say, as an example, like you're a person who was in a war and, a bomb blew up your legs and then you don't have legs. And what you'd like to do is jump directly to a central core timeline where your body is perfectly healthy and you never had anything amputated and you have all of your limbs. And let's say that you actually were able to bend and fold the fabric of time, space, and consciousness and place your awareness in that intentionally desired body that is healed, that is whole, that has everything to it. The rational, logical mind sticks up its head and it says, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense because I was in that war and my legs got blown off, and then how can I be here with my legs perfectly functional? There is the question of logical discontinuity, and that is the challenge for most people in being able to jump directly to the timeline where they are what we would be calling like an ascended master or an ascended master in training, but basically it's the perfected version of your term paper where your body is as healthy as what we would call an Olympic athlete, like, the the peak of fitness and the peak of health, and you're also a genius in terms of your, math skills and your cognitive faculties, and where you're also a genius in terms of your creativity, like being able to play music like a virtuoso, or paint like the greatest painter, or dance like the most beautiful ballerina. That's who we really are. So the question is, if we were able to instantaneously snap my fingers and go directly there to that timeline, to that experience, would the rational mind stick up its head and say, hey, wait a minute, how did I get here? How did this happen? Where a minute ago I was there with no legs and now I'm here with legs. Like, how would we understand and would we accept that instantaneous transformation? And this is a really good question, because think about Earth, the planet. Earth, the planet right now is more analogous to the veteran that has had the legs, horribly injured and is existing in a state that is not total vitality. That our planet has so much amazing potential just like your own body has so much amazing potential. We all have the potential to be an amazing athlete, an amazing, like your body is a tool to express so much in terms of artistry and, good energy. And many people are not expressing it. Like, they are sedentary and they eat a lot of genetically modified junk food and they're not living up to that potential. This is our planet. Right now, our planet has all forms of pollution that are affecting it and inhibiting her true expression of creativity. Just like a person that's sitting on the couch and eating, Cheetos all day long is not being as fully engaged and creative in terms of their physicality as they could be, so too is our planet not being fully engaged in terms of her creativity. That humans are treating the planet like a disposable object. They're treating it like a resource to be mined, not like someone who is alive that you are in partnership with. So an analogy that exhibits that distinction would be like saying, if you took a beautiful Stradivarius violin and you're like, hey, this violin, it's made out of wood, I can burn it in order to keep warm. That is how humans have been treating the planet Earth up until this point. And I'm not shaking the finger of blame at humans. I'm actually shaking the finger at the infestation that has taken over humans, that is controlling, like, the spasticity that is making humans not be able to perceive clearly and to act in a totally aberrant fashion, because no one is so self-destructive that they would destroy their own body or the planet that they live on and supports their body. But I see that a lot in this time and place. I see people doing all sorts of self-destructive crap, like from working at jobs that they don't love, to marrying spouses that they don't love, to eating food that they don't enjoy, to performing anti-health activities like smoking tobacco or ingesting all sorts of chemical crap, that they do it anyway. And so there is some very basic self-destruction that I'm seeing evidenced here. Again, I had to actually be reminded of that, because I'm not bragging here, but I'm not self-destructive. I work incredibly hard in order to be alive and be in this body as Aurora. And I'm very single-minded in that. I'm not interested in moving towards the membrane of death, but I had to recognize that some people are. Some people flirt. They go in that direction. They're like, oh, I think I'm just going to go over the cliff. I'm just going to go closer and closer to the cliff. And I'm like, no, guys, stay away from the cliff. Go in the middle of the road. Drive in the way you're supposed to drive. But some people, they do that flirting with disaster thing, and it's exploring those levels of self-destruction. And for some people, it is an expression of, they're trying to be free. I understand it, but that is not the way to be free. What you should do is explore, you're expanding your willpower so that you can then bring your trajectory towards total health and vitality and extended life. So what is Flying Rainbow Lasagna? It is not merely an intellectual exercise, and it's not a static object, it's a moving object that's the end result of an oscillation, and it's also a verb. It's a new dance movement that you can do with your DNA in order to reformat your DNA, like defragmenting your computer disk, even though I always say I'm not a transhumanist and humans are much more than just, organic computers. It's reweaving your possibilities of your life in relationship to the time field, which is, the great musical score of the cosmos, of the symphony of life. That with Flying Rainbow Lasagna, you can literally transform into that version of yourself that is as healthy as an Olympic athlete and, a genius virtuoso on every level. And that also is a well-adjusted, non-egotistical, human. That's a big part of it. It's not just health of the physical body, it's also health of the human ego, because there are the self-destruction, a lot of those impulses come from basic self-hatred that people have, literally hating their own ego. A lot of people look in the mirror and they don't like the person who they are. They're not like, oh, I'm proud of who I am. I did good stuff. I helped this many people today. I did this stuff that's helping humanity. I'm on the road. I'm doing the right thing. A lot of people look at themselves and they think, I sat on the couch and ate Cheetos all day long, and they know that they're not running the marathon. They know that they're not doing the exercise or doing the creativity, or that they're living a life half-lived, a mediocre existence, a mediocre excuse of what their life could be. And I think that they feel that on a deep soul level because they're on the periphery instead of in the center. And they can kind of look longingly at the version of themselves that is at the center. And they're like, I'm not doing the things I'm supposed to do. And then they're like, okay, I'll just self-destruct because I'm not doing the things I'm supposed to do. But instead of self-destructing, what humans can choose is to flying rainbow lasagna, which I don't mean to sound in a bad way, like it destroys the old self, but let's say it transcends the old self and the limitations of the old self and allows each person to move towards eternal life and that perfected version of self. And that the more that you do that, the more there is a genuine, healthy sense of self-love or acceptance of the ego, where it's like if you like your clothes, you're like, I like this shirt. I like the way it looks. I like the way it fits. I like the way it feels. I like the color. That's how you should be about your ego. You're like, this is the person who I am right now in this time and place. I like who I am. I like what I do. I like the way I interact with other people. And I'm proud of all the things that I have done. Like if you looked at the record of your existence, like the action, like the movie of your life. If you looked at the synopsis of the movie of your life, you'd be like, yeah, I like that I did that. Yeah, that is good. But I understand that for many people in this time and place, people look at the movie of their life and they cringe. They're like, oh, I wish I didn't do that. Oh, I wish I didn't do that. There was a funny movie that I enjoy that I'll recommend called Defending Your Life. It's kind of an old movie. I mean, it's kind of like from the 80s or whatever, but it has some funny parts of it. And the basic premise is that after you die, you go to an in-between realm that's called Judgment City, and you get a cosmic lawyer, and they show snippets from your life, and you have to defend yourself in court. And some people do really great because they're like rushing into burning buildings and bringing out puppies and kittens and, being a philanthropist and, helping humanity out. And some people are like, screw ups, and they're self-centered and they make mistakes, and all of their clips are cringeworthy, and they're regular flawed humans. And I'm not trying to say that I'm trying to get away from judgment. I'm not trying to say like, you're all horrible, flawed humans. It's not like that at all. What I'm really trying to say is like, hey, if you're a musician and you're practicing your music and you play a bunch of wrong notes, instead of hating yourself, you can be like, wow, I really need to practice more. Wow, I really need to find a new technique for playing because this is not working. That is what this school of life is supposed to be, where each person gets an opportunity to explore their own actions and characteristics and carve or sculpt who you are, the way that a sculptor brings forth a form, by chiseling away all of the excess that is not supposed to be there. Like you get a big giant block of stone and you start chiseling away, and if you do it in the right way, out comes, a picture of a beautiful woman, or, a picture of a whatever, like a strong, whatever muscular person. And like I'm thinking of these ancient marble statues from Greece or something like that. That's the whole point, is that we're supposed to be here, sculpting ourselves, our sense of self as we move through time. And you do that by, being here, by making, by doing activities and learning from what you've done and then changing and growing and becoming better. The first time that you plant a garden, like maybe you screw up and things don't grow properly, but you don't have to be like, that's it, I'm a failure, I hate myself. You can say like, hey, I screwed up, that plant did not grow. Let's do it differently. Let's fix it. Let's do it better. So a lot of this is about like, what is the internal response to these challenges? And so continually upgrading the personal term paper of your life and doing better and not descending into self-hatred. So a lot of the mind control has to do with saying that people are worthless, that people are, it's blame the victim stuff. It's all the stuff that's been done to Earth, the planet, and is then done to the inhabitants of Earth. It's saying that you're unworthy and flawed on a basic level. That's that whole idea of original sin, which I'm not a biblical literalist, and I think that there's so much unhealthy stuff in the Bible that I kind of wish everybody would just throw it out the window at this point. Like, I really wish that everybody would move beyond this idea of an externalized deity. And I also understand that there's still a lot more self-development that some people have to go through before they're ready to do the taking of personal responsibility by recognizing that they themselves are divine. And that's it. Like, when you recognize you're divine, you love yourself. You're like, yes, I made that. I did that. I think I'm awesome. I'm great. And because the things that you made really are awesome and great. Like, imagine if you made a wonderful meal and it really was tasty and filled with good food and everybody really loved it. You'd be like, yeah, pat on the back, self. I did an awesome job there. And that's very, very different than like burning the turkey and, whatever, the bacon is raw or your bread didn't rise properly. Like, those are all very valid mistakes. But if you have made mistakes, if you made food that's inedible, then it's like, okay, you have to learn, you have to try it again. But the challenge is that we've been in this world where even with the best of intentions and really trying to drive down the center of the road and really trying to do right, many people are misguided, and that's what mind control is. So it's like saying, I'm not saying everybody needs to have a free pass. Like, free pass, let's all get out of here because school is corrupt and, it's a distorted world. That's not what it's all about. Like I said, before the invention of the flying rainbow lasagna, there are beings who graduated from this time and place. And before consciousness fell, everybody graduated. That's the whole point. Death is the aberration. Death is not supposed to exist. Back in Atlantis, before our human DNA got degraded, everybody ascended. There was no death. You came into the physical body, you had a bunch of adventures for as long as you wanted to be here, and then when it was time, you transcended the level of physical material world and were liberated into the next highest level of consciousness. That is what everybody did, which is almost unfathomable to people from this time and place where everybody dies. And only maybe some very lucky select rock stars get to actually ascend, and then we'll remember their names, like they'll be the famous rock stars of the consciousness world. That's not what it's supposed to be like. Each one of us is supposed to be a famous rock star, quote unquote, of the world of consciousness. Each one of us has that potential to become an ascended master. And now that Flying Rainbow Lasagna is in existence, you don't have to go through 10, 20, 72,000 iterations exploring how you finally get to that wormhole and finally get to freedom. That was never the intention for this experience. So it's a lot of filler. What has been created here is a lot of gobbledygook, a lot of excess around the edges, a lot of filler, stuff that's not supposed to actually be in existence. And that's another portion of the distortion of the time field and the distortion or misapplication of cosmic law, because we're supposed to be lean and mean and come in and then ascend on up, as opposed to doing all of this stuff that's peripheral stuff and wasting a lot of time and making a lot of filler. That was never supposed to, it's like events that were never actually supposed to happen. So yes, it is possible to regain control of your mind through willpower and through the application of the verb, the dance, the flying rainbow lasagna, so that you can then reach levels of freedom in consciousness and not have to be, let's say, limited in this distorted funhouse. But also, we're cleaning up the funhouse. We're kicking out all of those nasty occupiers of the interstices and getting rid of the planetary rapists. So this world will not be so difficult to endure anymore, and it will be much more joyous and much more didactic in its experience. Thank you for being with me on the journey, and I appreciate you very much.